Good. Well, welcome everyone to the World Sustainable Development Summit. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone who's joining us from across the world. Welcome to a very special presentation on People-Centric Transition, an Indian perspective in partnership with the International Energy Agency. We have a stellar group of people who will be deliberating and debating on the notion of just transition. We were supposed to have the Honorable Chief Minister of Jharkhand, Mr. Hemant Soren, but we have received message that unfortunately, due to some last-minute meeting at his end, he won't be able to join, but he sends us his regards. We can now begin the session. My name is Karthikeya Sharma. I'm the Research Associate at the Energy and Resources Institute. I will now hand over the proceedings to Mr. R.R. Rashmi, Distinguished Fellow, the Energy and Resources Institute. We will begin with the opening session and then begin the moderation. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Karthikeya. Thank you very much. And on behalf of TERI and all those who are associated with this event today, let me once again welcome all of you, all the participants, the speakers, the panelists, and each one of you to this very important session at the WSDS this year. Now, the issue of people-centric transition or just transition has in fact is going to become much more important and a serious issue in the years to come. So far, we have been talking about, energy transition, and we have focused all our energies, the resources in the debates within the at the national level and at the international level on how we can facilitate and make a transition in terms of energy, use of energy, and how we can decarbonize. But very soon, I think we are going to enter an area of discussion where it will be very important for us to take all the stakeholders into their requirements and their consent into account. Fortunately, under the Paris Agreement, a framework has been created for consulting the stakeholders. And for the first time, earlier there was no such platform where the other stakeholders who are going to be affected either adversely or in some other manner by the changes that we carry out in the economic system, how their voice will be heard. And so this is going to become increasingly important. So people-centric development process is going to assume greater and greater importance in the years to come. Why this is and how we can do this is a critical question. India, like other countries, has come out with a net zero goal and a goal of converting its economy into a net zero economy by 2070. There are others who have declared different time frames for achieving this goal. But the question is what kind of strategy these countries will follow for effecting a transition that does not accentuate the existing vulnerabilities of different sections of society. We are already affected adversely and in a dangerous manner by the existing climate change. Now the kind of that we are going to to achieve the net zero goal, if they are going to increase these vulnerabilities to a greater extent, then I think we are going to have social instability. So we will have to be very careful and cautious in carrying out the planning process. So our development process, our development strategies must not compromise on the social objectives. And that is the real challenge. I think the energy transition challenge, we will be able to meet with the help of technology and resources as long as there is a regulatory framework available. But in case of the social transitions, for the transition to become just and people-centric, we cannot talk only about transition in the areas where energy is used. We will have to talk about the transition which takes place in the land use system, in the agriculture, in the people living in the mountain areas, people living in the coastal areas. So what kind of transition we should effect in order to be to stabilize our climate, reduce our emissions, and yet not deepen the existing vulnerabilities. That's the real challenge. Let me, I mean, in a country like India, we have to obviously get away from coal use, and then that is going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years after reaching the peak in terms of energy consumption or energy use. So the question is, the states and the people, sections of people who are dependent on the fossil fuel based economy, how are we going to take their concerns into account? India is a large country. The states which are dependent on coal, not only for livelihoods and jobs, but also for revenues, how will they be compensated against for this? So the process of economic diversification must be holistic, and there are examples of achieving good results. You know, we have examples of Germany or South Africa or Scotland, where in the process of implementing climate change policy, they have included, or they have made it imperative for these concerns to be taken into account. So should we do that, and how can we do that in India and similarly placed countries? Will be a real challenge, and I hope in the discussion today we will be able to address these questions. We have an excellent line of speakers and panelists today. We have Dr. Brian Motherway, who is the head of energy efficiency in IEA, Ms. Ghislaine Kieffer, again a policy analyst from IEA. We have Ms. Anupam Nidhi, who is the head of the corporate social responsibility in the Hindustan Zinc Limited. We have Mr. Jigme, we have Ms. Jessie Burton, Senior Associate at the E3G of South Africa, Professor Pradeep Swarnakar, Associate Professor of the Indian Institute of Technology in Kanpur, and Mr. Gulab Chandra Prajapati, who is a real practitioner, who is associated with the Damodar Bachao Abhiyan in the eastern part of India, where our coal belt lies, and where the just transition issues are extremely important. So we have an extremely rich panel of speakers coming from different backgrounds, representing the government, the international organizations, the grassroots level organizations, experts, and scientists. And I now would like to invite first Dr. Brian Motherway to address us and give his thoughts to us. We will have about 50 minutes, or 55 minutes roughly. So we will need to be cautious about the time that is available to us. And let me now invite Dr. Motherway. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Rishi. It's a pleasure to be here, and I must say, on behalf of all of us at the IEA, it's a great pleasure and honour indeed to be collaborating with TERI and the other colleagues on this session and in this event. We're very pleased. And as you've said, Mr. Chairman, this is a very important topic, and I think it's one that it's very important that we give more time and discussion to, and it's great to see the excellent work that's going on in so many parts of India as well as in other countries. So it's a pleasure for us to be here today. We hope to learn a lot from the colleagues participating in this session. But first, let me spend just a few minutes giving a kind of global context to this question, starting with our understanding of our direction of travel on clean energy transitions themselves. Let me start by saying the last few years have been a very dynamic period for our understanding of the path we're on for global transitions towards net zero, towards clean energy, towards decarbonisation, whatever way you want to call it. Even in the last year, we've seen so many countries make pledges about net zero, either in 2050 or in periods after that. And we've seen other pledges at Glasgow, such as the methane commitment and other pledges that now see it for the first time ever. If all of the pledges made up to and including Glasgow were delivered, we would retain contain the global temperature rise to less than 2 degrees compared to pre-industrialization. Now, is that good news or not? It's not enough. It doesn't meet the full terms of the Paris Agreement. It still implies some very considerable social and environmental upheaval, but it's certainly better than what we've seen up to now. But of course, the big if there is whether that's going to be implemented or not. And I have to say that I'm afraid our collective track record on implementing these kind of ambitions is not very good so far. In fact, I would say that in 2021, the year just ended, we saw one of the biggest single yearly increases in CO2 emissions from the energy sector that we've ever recorded. So not only are we not on course for our collective ambition, but we're actually still going in entirely the wrong direction, where our emissions are actually going up collectively. And of course, that's driven by economic growth, particularly by larger energy demand in 2021 as economies recovered from some of the worst phases of the COVID pandemic, though of course it's not over by any means. But we still see that now is the moment where we need much, much stronger, firmer implementation of clean energy policies all around the world if we're to get back in the right direction of travel towards our ambitions and towards our collective goals on clean energy. Now, all of that will require a lot of policy changes, a lot of action, a lot of investment, and it will affect our lives in many ways, from where we get our energy, where we are employed, how we use energy in our homes and offices, how we travel around our societies, where our economic well-being and growth comes from. There are many changes coming to societies around the world in the coming decades. And that's why it's right, of course, to focus on people and on the concept of people-centered clean energy transitions. And why do we talk about that? Well, let me say, first of all clean energy transitions need to be absolutely for and about people. We are undertaking these great endeavors because we understand that we want to mitigate the worst effects of climate change on people. We want to improve people's lives, bring them access to affordable energy, create jobs, improve their local environments. All of these measures must be seen as fully part of our clean energy transitions. Secondly, even notwithstanding all of that, these changes we're about to embark on, these policies we're about to implement, this clean energy transition pathway will not succeed without bringing people with it, without bringing populations on board in terms of making sure they see the need for these changes, that they benefit from them, they have their say in the decisions that will be made, that we need a people-centered approach and an inclusive approach if we're to have any chance of success. So, Kartiki, if you could go to the next slide, please. All of this is why last year the executive director of the IEA set up the Global Commission on People-Centered Clean Energy Transitions. And we're grateful to many leading thinkers from around the world. Last year, we brought together 30 energy and climate ministers, other policymakers, political figures, representatives of civil society, representatives of labour, youth, energy access and other dimensions to come together and share their wisdom about how to do clean energy transitions in a fully people-centered and inclusive way. And we spent the year working with them examining what has happened in all parts of the world, what is good practice, what is bad practice, what are the best examples we can draw on so that we can come to realize what is the difference between clean energy transitions generally and truly people-centered and inclusive clean energy transitions. So what have we learned about how to do this well? Next slide, please. So the Commission, just before COP late last year, made a set of recommendations. They made 12 recommendations across 4 themes. And these recommendations are all action-oriented recommendations aimed primarily at policymakers, but also investors and other decision makers to think about how to make decisions and how to implement policies that are people-centered, that will maximize the benefits for people and maximize their chances of success. The first and of course primary theme in many people's minds is decent jobs and worker protection. And as you said, Mr. Chairman, India has some very important challenges here in terms of particularly states that are dependent on coal and the transition away from employment in coal, and not just, of course, in the coal sector itself, but in all the sectors that depend on the coal sector for their revenue, for their employment, for their well-being and their social fabric. And of course, I know that TERI is doing excellent work on this topic in many ways. And just, in fact, earlier today, we saw iForest launch a very interesting study on the Korba region, one of the most coal-dependent regions in India, looking at how just transitions might work in the context of a region which is already very dependent on coal, has a very heavy dependence on an informal workforce, and of course has a high rate of poverty in the region. And these are all key questions that many regions in India will face, and of course many regions and countries around the world are grappling with exactly the same issues. Whether it's questions in South Africa that you'll hear from Jesse later, or countries such as Canada, Germany, Denmark, many others thinking about how to accelerate transitions out of coal. And in fact, we are also discussing this with our good friends in Indonesia in their capacity as the president of the G20 this year, and there'll be some G20 level discussions on this very topic in the coming weeks and months. The second theme is how to align clean energy transitions with social and economic development. Clean energy transition policies have to make people's lives better. India is a very good example of where you have made such fantastic progress on energy access in recent years by bringing electricity to villages right throughout the country where that wasn't possible before. And of course, this will more and more depend in the future on clean energy, on the massive growth of solar power in India, greater use of wind, greater use of decentralized as well as centralized resources. So these issues really need to be seen as fully aligned. And of course, for countries where energy access is still a challenge, as we know is the case in many parts of the world, we need to see a prioritization of full, clean, secure, affordable access to electricity for all citizens of the world as part of our transitions. There are many other dimensions to these questions, but I won't dwell on them in the interest of time. In terms of the third theme, equity, social inclusion and fairness, many countries are thinking about how to implement policies that, first of all, don't disproportionately affect negatively poorer populations in terms of carbon taxation or price rises or other measures like that, but also how to benefit marginalized communities, how to make sure that new jobs created benefit excluded populations, how to make sure that gender equity is built into all policies, and how to make sure that social inclusion is enhanced through clean energy transitions. And I think challenging the sometimes broadcast myth that these things are in opposition and have to be, you know, kind of put in competition with each other. But in fact, we know from good practice around the world that policies can align them very well. Finally, given that we're talking about people-centered transitions, people have to be central. People have to be seen as active participants, whether it's in the way we all use energy, whether it's in our behavior as to how efficient our energy use is, the decisions we make about what type of energy to use and when, or whether it's about us as citizens of our regions, our states, our countries, as global citizens. How do we participate in these discussions so that we understand the changes that are coming, that our voices can be heard, and that we can make the best decisions that maximize the greatest number of benefits for all people. And of course, a key voice here is youth. And we were very pleased that the Global Commission had two very articulate and very wise youth representatives among its members who were able to share the perspective of youth with us and think about how the voice of youth can be particularly well represented. So, Mr. Chair, we're delighted to be part of this event. I wanted to share with you that there's a lot of global conversation going on. In many countries, they're facing the same macro issues in terms of the need to transition away from fossil fuels such as coal, the need to bring greater levels of energy access. But of course, there are many differences as well. There are many differences between the economic circumstances of countries, the resource bases. It doesn't just change by country, but it changes by state and by region as well. So we need a balance of learning from each other globally, understanding the issues we share in common, but also realizing that one size does not fit all when we apply local solutions and we address the right policies and the right actions to benefit people and to protect people who will be affected by the changes that are coming. It's really fantastic for us in the IEA to be able to collaborate with many institutions as well as government itself in India, because there's such interesting work going on there, such interesting learning and experimentation, as well as really great policies going in place right now. So we look forward to continuing to collaborate with all of our friends and colleagues in India over the coming months and years on this really, really important topic. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Madhav. There is an echo here. Okay, I think the problem is resolved now. Thank you very much, Dr. Motherway, for a wonderful, excellent exposition on what the Global Commission on People-Centric Transition is doing. And some of the ideas are really absolutely fantastic, and they're in place. They are very important ideas. And maybe I have one or two questions which I'll like to come back to you when we are done with the other speakers. The next speaker on my list is Ms. Ghislaine Kieffer, who is, before that, I think before inviting her, I think I must invite my own colleague, Karthikeya Sharma, to give a presentation on the work that we have done here and the issues that he would like you to address. Karthikeya, over to you.
Thank you, sir. And I'll be extremely brief due to the paucity of time. And I would like to showcase some of the findings that we have at TERI done over the course of the Just Transition projects that we've been working on over the last couple of years. And we found something very interesting, the aspects and notions that we would like to focus on going forward. So one of the most brilliant aspects that we understood during the course of the qualitative and the quantitative research through government documents that we came across is there are very specific challenges that exist in the eastern region of India, which is affected by coal. And they can be jotted down in almost 5 aspects in case a just transition happens. One is the livelihood issues. Almost all the states in India which are high production coal states reside in the lowest 2 wealth quintiles, which is extremely poverty-stricken area. And if a just transition happens without any equitable distribution of goods and services, then we won't be able to move forward equitably and sustainably. So that is something we need to look forward to, because when we look at the official numbers, more than 400,000 people are skilled in are working in these coal mines, but the unofficial numbers are well beyond over 1 million. So once that comes into account, we have to make sure that the livelihood issues are ascertained in this area. Then we have to look at the revenue and the financial aspect as well. And our research pointed out the fact that almost 15% of the non-tax revenue of all the major coal-producing states comes from coal mines and all coal-producing companies. And that's a significant amount of number which will go completely unused, will be washed off the books once the mines go away and they start the production somewhere else and they are shut down. So how do we manage for that amount of capital? That has to be made sure and understood as well. Then there are infrastructure and social vulnerabilities. A lot of CSR aspects exist in these mining areas. The mining companies have established schools, hospitals, and many technological infrastructure as well. And I understand our CSR expert on the panel will be able to expand on this further. So what happens to those infrastructure? That is also very imperative to understand. The social capital of land is one of the aspects which is fairly not understood well in beyond the research scholar industry. So we also need to understand that people are attached to the land, but they're also attached to each other in the community. So what happens to them once the ties from the land are severed and they are not able to communicate and be with each other? How does that impact them, not only socially, but physically and mentally as well? Those aspects also need to be understood. And obviously the illegal mining aspect. How do we make sure that people who are residing in the illegal mines, they're working there, they're also become part of the formal mining areas or the formal employment workforce, and we can ascertain that they are compensated well once the just transition happens equitably. So these are some of the challenges that need to be ensured and some of the things that we have found in our research over the last few years. The aspect of just transition is very imperative and something that our Professor Pradeep Swarnakar will be able to elaborate further. There are 3 aspects of justice in sociology which are very imperative: is the procedural, distributive, and restorative justice. In the procedural aspect, we need to understand that facilitation and inclusive decision-making process, everyone is part of the decision-making process, and they understand what the decisions are being made, and they are part of the discussion. So if they are not, then there's no justice there. Then there comes a distributive part of it. Everyone is compensated equitably from a monetary standpoint and also from a social standpoint as well. That's the aspect of distributive justice that exists. And also the restorative aspect of it, where empowering fairness amongst all stakeholders by engaging in large-scale structured social dialogue partnerships. Now, social dialogue partnerships is very, very key when it comes to just transition, and something our panel will be able to expand on once we move further in it. So what are the opportunities that we can come from it? One of the objectives we need to look at is revenue augmentation, rural entrepreneurship, and improving the sustainable infrastructure. So in terms of revenue augmentation, a lot of these states in India are highly prone to sun. So the implementation of solar energy plants, utility, and even some of the manufacturing facilities, given the supply chain is extremely well equipped there, we can establish there, which will be labor intensive, which will provide employment, and we can support land leasing models there as well, which can improve the revenue stream for the state. In terms of rural entrepreneurship, we can look at enterprise creation of accessible products, opportunities for support services, and then the people can also become entrepreneurs by the establishment of microfinance institutions. And in the improvement of sustainable infrastructure, we need to bring in private sector initiatives under CSR to upkeep for the social infrastructure. And in terms of grants, we can also take grants from the Financial Commission, the devolution. They have a grant has been established by the Finance Commission there. We need to look at that as well and how we can make sure that we utilize the funds appropriately. The drivers to support just transition and something 5 key drivers that we have been able to understand through our research. One is the augmentation of public and private sector financing, the strengthening of human capital. And how do we strengthen human capital? We need to make sure that they're educated in what is exactly happening and why the changes are happening within their areas, because people can be very resistant to these changes, especially in the eastern part of area where the social capital of the emotion with the land and communities is extremely high. So we need to educate them. The promotion of social dialogue partnership, and something Mr. Gulab Chandra can also comment on once his turn of speaking comes into place, how we can improve the stakeholder partnerships amongst all people who will be part of the just transition. And then everything here is connected to policy. How do we bring on conducive policies where all of these aspects will be tied together and we can move forward sustainably and equitably? Thank you.
Thank you, Karthikeya, for this short but very focused presentation on the key issues in achieving a just transition, at least in the coal-bearing areas of our country. There are other aspects, of course, when we talk, as I mentioned, agriculture is a key sector where also these just issues are equally important. Agricultural food security plus the role of people who are dependent on agriculture. So let me now go over to, once again, to International Energy Agency, who has supported this work. We are thankful to them for leading this effort in the area of just transition. And if we don't succeed there, I think our energy transition itself may become threatened. So let me now invite Ms. Ghislaine Kieffer to tell us what exactly, I mean, the kind of work which IEA is doing in this area, and what is your view?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And this is a great opportunity. As Dr. Motherway said, we're very thankful for this invitation. And we could see from Dr. Motherway's and Mr. Sharma's presentation how much learning there is in this type of interaction. So thank you very much about this. So I'll start my remarks by just giving some key numbers on behalf of the International Energy Agency. As part of our net zero by 2050 roadmap, we did a global estimation that the global energy transition would lead to the creation of 14 million new jobs in clean energy supply and transitioning of around 5 million workers from fossil fuel sectors. This also means that 30 million workers will require additional skills and training. However, new jobs will not always be in the same place or sectors where employment is lost. And job losses will be most pronounced in communities that are heavily dependent on fossil energy production, especially coal, which is why we're having this conversation today. And even when the number of direct energy jobs lost is small, the impact on local economy can be significant. As we know, most fossil fuel jobs are geographically concentrated and are significantly intertwined with the local economy. If we take the global picture, the energy sector only accounts for about 1.2% of global employment, but it represents a high percentage of total earnings in many communities, as we just described in the case of India. It is clear, therefore, that this widely shared objective of clean energy transition and reduced dependence on coal presents remarkable challenges, not only for coal sector producers and workers, but also due to the broader implications for other sectors in coal-producing nations. As Dr. Motherway highlighted, as well as Mr. Sharma, this is not just an energy challenge, but also a macroeconomic, a social and justice one, with important gender implications as well. I'm not sure if we'll have time to shed light on some of these gender aspects, but they're very important as well. This highlights the need for good design of transition plans, and as Dr. Motherway highlighted, this was the objective of the 12 recommendations of the IEA Global Commission. The 12 recommendations that Dr. Motherway highlighted were underpinned by 150 case studies from Commission members. And these case studies highlight the importance of long-term engagement, often over decades. Some of the examples we highlighted in Germany or Scotland or other countries really spanned decades. The value of strong social dialogue across national and local government. This is especially important in federal countries with a federal system of government. And of course, a dialogue between businesses, unions, and other key stakeholders. So I will now focus just on 2 of the 12 recommendations that are directly relevant to our discussion today. The number 2, if you look at the IEA document, focuses on the need for tailored government support for communities and workers, in particular with a focus on skilling and training. And one example here that is very interesting is Spain's Just Transition Agreements, which offer support to local industry, retraining for green jobs, and environmental restoration. The Spanish government announced the closure of coal mining operations by the end of 2020 and redirected all mining subsidies towards revitalizing coal mining regions. The policy was the result of a deal between the government, trade unions, and the industry to redirect 250 million euros in investment in affected areas. And the work is spearheaded by the Spanish Just Transition Institute. The second recommendation I will focus on is number 3, and the importance of social dialogue and robust stakeholder engagement, as well as a whole of government approach to deliver better outcomes. And here, a very interesting example, also from a federal system of government, is in the US. In January 2020, the US president issued an executive order and established an interagency working group on coal and power plant communities and economic revitalization. What's interesting in this interagency working group is that it brings together leaders of different agencies to find an all-of-government approach to identify existing resources and new opportunities to assist communities that have been impacted by the energy transition. And as part of the group's work, senior government officials from across the US travel to energy communities in the most important coal mining regions, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. And there were very extensive consultations to inform efforts to coordinate federal resources and reduce barriers to access for these communities. As a result, the working group identified nearly 40 billion US dollars in existing federal programs that could be redeployed to assist these communities. So it is very encouraging to see these different components are coming together in India's approach to coal transitions. And these dimensions will be integral to IEA's work going forward through deeper analysis on best practice advice and implementation of people-centered transition. As part of our work, we are ready to support further collaboration in terms of knowledge exchange and policy dialogues among IEA member and association countries, and in particular, as highlighted, with a dialogue across emerging economies facing similar challenges such as India, South Africa, and Indonesia. And we hope to build upon today's discussion, further collaborate with you, and we stand ready to assist in any way we can. Thank you again for this invitation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kieffer. Thanks for this wonderful presentation on the key issues and for highlighting the importance of social dialogue and the whole of economy approach. Let me now invite Ms. Anupam Nidhi, who is the head of the CSR division in the Hindustan Zinc Limited, a very major industrial establishment in India, in the western sector of our country. The Rajasthan, the state where this is located, this is an arid region, and the livelihood sources are extremely limited. So whatever they are going to do in this field is going to have a very large social implication. So let's learn from her what she thinks about this issue. Over to you, Ms. Nidhi.
Thank you, Chairman, sir. And I am honored to be part of this August panel for our discussions today. I understand TERI has been actually leading it, especially in India, as a torchbearer of bringing the local action movement to ground, not just for last few years, but for last 2 decades or so. And that itself shows the kind of focus that we as an country have on this particular subject matter, and how institutions like TERI have been focusing to really bring in these the belief that strong public demand increases the likelihood that the government and the other elements will prioritize this as a major action force for them to bring about the larger change. I do see there are a couple of other factors which are apart from coal, as was being discussed. There are other implications which will further put another additional stress on the whole system, and that is the whole advent of Industry 4.0. We all talked about prior to COVID that India is still not an automated country, as in 4.0 is very far away. But I guess COVID in a way has broken the ice. Or for that matter, it's about the whole element of the recent deliberation discussions on animal husbandry and it being one of the larger contributors to the larger carbon footprint across the globe. All of these actions or resulting actions would really have an implication in terms of how skilling is looked at. When I say would CSR and should CSR be part of it? Yes, I think skill development, be it on lines of focusing on the rural India of maybe a Rajasthan as a state or any other place in India, in peri-urban or urbanized, be on lines of reskilling or for that matter rehabilitation. I think there is no other better means than probably looking at to achieve a sizable impact and derive the strategic imperative from CSR, specifically at this point in time when the times are very challenging. And I believe, as I was mentioning, the Industry 4.0 advent element will also have its own repercussions and impact. And kind of India, which is wanting to be, or rather aiming to be the $5 trillion economy with more than 70 million, people entering into the Indian workforce by 2030, as we see. Unemployment will be a concern which will loom large and is probably the most constricting factor around. It does require a renewed focus on employability, yes, which would lead to the employment and further to an Atmanirbhar Bharat, as we want to say, through economic upliftment. We need to look at the culmination of skill, not just skill as alone, but look at speed, the scale part of it. And I think what needs to be brought in is the larger intent of the programs that we talk about or the focus that we talk about in India as a whole, whether that's Make in India or for that matter, Digital India or Skill India, all of them coming together in unison and then focusing on skilling. I think otherwise it will be spectrums which are there in their own silos. All of this has to come together with a certain definite focus. And all the sector skill councils or institutions that have been created in the past since 2015 onwards should then come into unison to work towards this. What needs to be done as for an inclusive, adaptive set of programs? Of course, it is something that I see as a triangle kind of a triangle kind of a thing, which looks at not just the institutions which are promoting skilling, but the industry at the other corner. And finally, the students at the hub of it, and also looking at the teachers part of it, the faculty that is teaching. So this has to be a triangle element which has to focus on the students per se. And there has to be renewed focus on offering flexibility in the courses that are being designed, whether that's being designed by the industry to focus on their requirements or by the institutions themselves. There has to be an extensive focus on employability skills, which so far even now are pretty much lacking. We still have just 30% of our focus in institutions like ITI where the employability skills are looked at. And I'm talking about focus on the project management skills or for that matter, soft skills, or much critical, the digital skills. And if you look at the counterpart of that, whether that's German or Scandinavian countries, the employability skill is embedded into the program. It is the base of the program where all the technical and vocational skillings happen. And that's something that we need to bring back into our system with far more rigor and focus. The third part that I look at is the establishment and strengthening of existing systems or institutions that we have, which could be the ITIs as a hub. But ultimately, it has to be the industry institute pipeline which needs to be established, which as of now has not yet got into the scale that it should be. There is no institute industry interaction as it should be for a scale like India, which has the demographic dividend, as we say. Focusing on reskilling of teachers, specifically when we look at the advent of COVID, how can technology be an aid, a contributor to it? And then looking at how we could have hybrid models of learning to ensure that there's a last mile connectivity, also online certifications for that matter, or for that matter, looking at how are you doing a kind of hybrid element of practical as well as theory aspect. Unless and until we focus on this, reaching out to the rural poor or the rural masses would be a very difficult proposition. And finally, also looking at the upgradation of these ITIs or the skill centers as a hub on technological changes, without which I believe bringing in the hybrid model would be a challenge. Also, what I would like to share here is as an important element is that we need to focus on all these barriers or all these elements which will strengthen us, like the time cost. as well as the location part of it, without which it will be a challenge to work along on all of this. Where I do also see is there's an opportunity to focus on smart milk production, for example, in agriculture, and bringing this learning, this whole learning back into the larger planning, and where ITIs promote, and there are certain models which have been established in silos, which needs to be now scaled up, and they've proven themselves, whether that's with NABARD or any other organization, where the agricultural element or animal husbandry element has been brought into the ITIs, and how that has been able to groom not just the focus on enhancing the local economy, but also focusing on the larger sustainability of these efforts, and also the larger ecosystem around in a village kind of a setup. So I do believe CSR is well positioned, and skilling shall support vital for the restart of the economy. If we do not focus on it, there would be a challenge that we as a country shall face. And ultimately, the Sustainable Development Goals, goal number 17, does talk about partnership collaboration. And that's where the industry, the government, as well as the academia needs to come together to focus on skilling. Thank you, Chairman, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Nidhi, for bringing or highlighting the issue of the reskilling of teachers and proper appropriate skilling of students through institutions which should be supported not just by the government but by industry as well. So you have drawn attention to industry institutes and the role of CSR in this. Thank you very much for this. Let me now go to Ms. Jessie Burton, who is a senior associate with the E3G of South Africa, to tell us about her experience and her views on the subject. And let's keep the time limit in view, because we are nearing the end of our discussion. We have 3 more speakers. Over to you, Ms. Burton.
Thank you so much, and it's a delight to be here today with colleagues from TERI. So a small background just about South Africa. I think that South Africa has some instructive lessons for other developing countries, because they've been talking about and embarking on planning around just transition now for almost, well, for 10 years of planning, but kind of really getting into the meat of what it will take to deliver a just transition in the last 2 years. And for some broader context, South Africa is a very energy and climate intensive economy. We get 87% of our electricity comes from coal, many jobs in coal mining and related sectors. But coal regions are also very polluted. There's very high levels of unemployment, especially for young people and especially for women. And coal jobs are relatively good jobs in terms of wages and pensions and levels of unionization, and that's not always matched in alternate sectors. So, you know, we've been saying that decent work agenda is really important, and that is really important across all sectors, because this is an economy-wide transformation. The kind of background to just transition in South Africa, it's been in South Africa's climate policy since 2011 and in our first nationally determined contribution. And that was driven by progressive elements, especially unions and civil society. We had a national planning commission process to look at just transition pathways, including in Mpumalanga, our main coal region. And in parallel, there was a development of sectoral analyses, what we called the National Employment Vulnerability Assessment and the Sector Jobs Resilience Plans, which both looked at risks to jobs in the energy transition and from climate, and not just climate policy, also climate impacts like agriculture, and then also assessed opportunities. So are there job opportunities in fly ash or mine closure, for example? What's emerged in the last few years is a Presidential Climate Commission, which is explicitly focused on looking at a just transition to net zero for the country. And so they're developing, in fact, it was released just 2 days ago, a national framework on just transition for South Africa, which looks at these procedural, distributive and restorative elements at a national level. Obviously, there's a lot of focus on coal because South Africa is so coal intensive. Of course, you always need to include voices who are excluded, especially communities, I think, in this case, are not always involved in these national level discussions. that framework is also thinking and looking a little bit more at how these costs and benefits are shared. How do you actually do worker transition? What are the economic diversification opportunities? How do you drive industrial policy to create more vibrant economies in coal regions? Or in fact, just this week we're closing a lot of our refineries. It's not just a coal question, it's fossil fuels and different kinds of elements of the energy sector and transport and manufacturing. In parallel, what we've had is a local level build out of institutions and capacity. So provincial climate change policy and a just transition strategy. The Mpumalanga province has developed a green economy cluster, which brings together academia, government and business to try and create projects in the green economy for economic diversification in the region. It's really just kicking off this year. And then what I think is really interesting for other countries might be that both Eskom, which is kind of our NTPC, has set up a Just Energy Transition Project Office to manage the closure of some of our coal plants. And as all of this has kind of developed, what has happened is that we updated our NDC last year, and as part of that process, we signed what was called the Just Energy Transition Partnership with some donor countries. And that's a long-term partnership to support South Africa in decarbonizing our power sector, growing alternative clean energy sectors like hydrogen and EVs, but very much around supporting just transition. And I think that offers some interesting, not yet lessons because it's only starting now, but a potentially interesting example of how you can put just transition really at the center of energy planning and climate planning. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very focused information on what kind of institutional structures have been put in place in South Africa at the national level and also at the provincial level. This is, particularly, at least for me, it's an eye-opener. Any policy for just transition will succeed only if it is fully realized that it needs to be a part of the developmental policy focus and not just left to the private sector or the different social stakeholders to fend for themselves and devise their own solutions. Extremely useful information. Thank you. Let me now invite Professor Pradeep Swarnakar, Associate Professor in the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, who is a sociologist himself and works on these issues in his lab there. So over to you, Professor, and please tell us in the short time that is available to us about what you think, how we can make progress.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, sir, Mr. Rashmi, and thank you, Souvik and Sati, and the distinguished panelists here. It's a great opportunity to be here and present some of our ideas. So today I am going to talk about work. It's under review. And that sets the context of just transition. So my screen is visible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Okay, so let's start. The context is that in the global south, we are having pressure because mostly we are coal intensive and we have a kind of a clear deadline, as already mentioned by Mr. Rashmi and the IEA people, that okay, we have to have a phase out or phase down or whatever it is. And then in this context, how we'd like to go these things. I would like to focus today about the research what is going on globally, and particularly what is the scope in India, because always the studies and the research are very important to understand and to evaluations of the policy process. So the key concept and the research gap, what we can understand is that there are a lot of issues on the energy justice in general, and with this we have different dimensions and approaches of transition. It's a niche management, it's a MLP, and various other dimensions, multi-level perspective, various dimensions are there. But what would like to focus here, which is already discussed, and the speaker from the South Africa also mentioned that so many people like the academician and the government and the business, they should work together. So the stakeholder engagement and the local governance. So today's focus is local governance, and this local governance should be also participatory. So I'm just quickly going through the slides. There are actually a lot of studies in this, but I'd like to highlight what kind of study and where we are right now in terms of research. So this is a kind of a generalized framework. What we have done, we have searched from Web of Science some of the keywords regarding the research on energy transition, and we found that it's around 400,000 documents we have found which discuss about energy transition. And also we have searched about energy justice, which is very less. So we can understand that justice, what is the position of the justice in energy transition. And when you combine energy transition and energy justice, it's 569. And then we add another layer like energy justice and local governance. It's a 95. And when you combine all these three, energy justice, energy transition, and local governance, we got 36 important articles after cleaning all the and reviewing the documents. And we have selected those documents and we have analyzed the outcome of this document just to understand what is going on in the academic field in terms of just energy transition, and particularly focusing on the local governance. Now, what we have achieved is that this transition research is going on for a long time. Like this timeline we have observed from 1994 to 2015. And there are a lot of key issues are there in terms of transition. But after the Paris Agreement, what we have observed is a huge rise of the justice literature, and also that is linked to the policy. So as also Chairman mentioned that, okay, after Paris, we have a very important thrust on justice issues, and that we can also see in our academic literature. And in the right side, on the keyword co-occurrences, what we can see that the red one is the justice terminologies, what is actually discussed and researched in this area. And the blue one is actually terminologies related to transition. And most of the thing, it's environment related transition. But in the down, there are green and purple. In the green, we can see there are some issues which is related to the negative health impacts and something related to the policy. And the purple one, which is very less, it's a policy linked economy and the poverty related term. So this is the four major cluster co-occurrences we have found: justice, transition, health, and policy. Okay, so going to the global one, because here we are getting a lot of interesting insights from Spain to Indonesia to South Africa, and globally very important reports from IEA. And now see that who are the most productive country in terms of research in just transition and local governance. And we can see that United Kingdom and USA is actually researchers from there. They are writing more on these issues. And as a researcher, we try to focus like it's a single authored publications or single country publication or multi-country publication, because that is very important to understand if we are doing a cross-country comparison. Because as the panelists rightly mentioned that, okay, the cases are different, local situations are different, and then we have to understand very local level, country-specific, even the subnational level understanding. Now, we can see that very less number of studies are there from India. It's not here. Now, in terms of collaboration of this thing, we can see that is also in the global north. Most of the literature are focused on the global north, and they are collaborating with each other. So the framework which is coming also from the international organizations, it's a global north-based framework. So this also entails that we need a kind of a little bit more studies on global south. Like we have to initiate from our own side, and also the international organizations and funder also should focus or work on some of the research issues in the global south. Now, in terms of just transition research in India, as rightly mentioned by the panelists, the TERI is one of the pioneer, and also iForest and other few researchers from Europe, they are working on this. I'll not go into the detail, but it's related to the coal workers, it's related to the top-down, bottom-up problem. It's also the barriers of transition. So these are the issues. What in this paper we are trying to actually give a framework of inverted pyramid that, okay, we should have a demand, what else people are talking about from the grassroots, the coal mine workers and the local residents, and then the local government should also be included, and then it should go to the federal or the national government, and then the flow of fund definitely it should be from the national government to the grassroots level people. So this, and there are important roles of different stakeholders like trade unions, civil society organizations, and research organizations, as mentioned by the other panelists. So the conclusion, I'd like to say a few things, 4 or 5 points. One is that more thrust on energy transition research is required in the global south in terms of the research agenda. So more and more research, more and more organizations will come and do a grassroots level research to understand the condition. That will strengthen our policy process. Now, understanding the pattern and nature between the linkages between and within the stakeholder. So this is very important to understand, because the stakeholders, they have a sometimes this is a misalignment between the understanding. We call it sometimes a pluralistic ignorance, but these kind of things are there. We have to understand even the same stakeholder, they might have a difference of opinion on how we should go about it. So between and within collaboration pattern and understanding is required. Need a replicable model. So we are talking about different model, maybe in South Africa, maybe in Indonesia, maybe some of the World Bank model, but we have to test this at the subnational and regional level, because otherwise that applicability might not be very useful. And finally, one important thing is that we have a lot of macro issues, macro policies, global and national level, and we also have some of the grassroots level work which is going on. So many people are working, so many organizations are working. Somehow we need to connect this macro and micro. That is the most important thing. And finally, the last point I'd like to mention, that energy transition is an opportunity. Opportunity because the earlier the coal-based economy was very hierarchical, exploitative, and then in this transition of renewable energy, we can actually get an opportunity, and in this opportunity, collaboration is the future. Thank you very much, Chairman, sir, and thank you everyone in the panel.
Thank you, Professor Swarnakar, for an interesting idea, aspect of the academic work that is being done on the areas relating to climate justice, energy justice. This is an extremely useful piece of information for building up future policy and also the institutions. Let me now go to Mr. Gulab Chandra Prajapati, who is actually a practitioner on the ground. And let us hear from him how he looks at the whole business of transition, which is just in nature, which is people-centric, people-oriented, and how we can achieve this. Given the fact that we have to move away from dirty fuels, coal, and transform our energy sector. Over to you, Mr. Prajapati.
सबसे पहले एक अवसर हमको मिला है और मैं हिंदी से बात करूंगा, और इसके लिए प्रदीप सर से निवेदन करेंगे कि हमारी बातों को इंग्लिश में बता देंगे।
अच्छा, तो
सबसे पहले
Prajapati साहब, and for the benefit of other listeners and the participants here, पहले आपसे रिक्वेस्ट ये हो कि आप ब्रीफली, चूंकि हमारे पास अब समय कम है, 5 मिनट का समय है लगभग, तो अगर आप अपनी बात संक्षेप में 5 मिनट में कर लें, तो फिर मैं उनको प्रोफेसर साहब को कहूंगा कि उसका सारांश फिर बाकी लोगों को समझा दें। क्या ठीक रहेगा?
जी 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 जी
Okay. So let me explain to others. What we have agreed, Mr. Prajapati is going to speak in the local language here, which you may not be able to understand. So he'll speak briefly, and then I'll request Professor Swarnakar to tell you what he has conveyed in English. Over, Prajapati Sahab, बताएं. Quickly.
2015 से जो क्लाइमेट चेंज के सम्मेलन होने के बाद ये दुनिया में जो क्लाइमेट चेंज के असर को कम करने के लिए हमने रिन्यूएबल ऊर्जा को लेकर के हमने काम करने के लिए शुरुआत किया है। और इसी का जो असर अभी हम लोग देख रहे हैं कि जस्ट ट्रांजिशन एक दुनिया में एक नए शब्द के रूप में उभर के सामने आया है। और हम लोग विशेष करके जहां हम लोग रहते हैं झारखंड में, और झारखंड जो है वो कोल बेस और थर्मल पावर बेस राज्य है। तो यहाँ पर हम लोगों ने देख रहे हैं कि जब हम कोल बेस को अगर हम कल बंद करते हैं तो उसके असर क्या क्या होंगे, इसको लेकर के हम लोग ने काम अभी हम लोग में हमने कई ट्रेड यूनियन के साथियों से हमने बात करने शुरू किया है। खदान के कारण जो डिस्प्लेस लोग हुए हैं उनसे हमने बात करना शुरू किया है, और यहाँ के जो जनप्रतिनिधि हैं उनसे हमने बात करना शुरू किया है कि अगर कल हमारे पास जो कोयला है, कोयला आने वाले समय में अगर बंद हो जाता है, अगर उसके उत्पादन बंद हो जाएंगे तो उसका असर किन पर पड़ेगा और किस किस पर पड़ेगा, इसके लेकर के हम उनको कैसे एक न्यायोचित उनको हम न्याय दे सकते हैं। तो इसी पर हम अपनी बात को शुरुआत की है, और हम लोग लगातार जस्ट ट्रांजिशन को लेकर के हम लोगों ने काम शुरू किया है। और 3-4 महीनों में हम लोगों ने यहाँ के जो विस्थापित हैं, यहाँ के मजदूर यूनियन के लोग हैं, यहाँ के जो कार्यकर्ता हैं, ग्रास रूट्स में हैं, किसान हैं, मजदूर हैं, उनके साथ में हम लोगों ने काम स्टार्ट किया है कि आने वाले समय में जो एक बदलता हुआ ये दुनिया बदल रहा है, उस दुनिया में हम इन लोगों को जो विशेष करके कोयला खदान या कोयला से अपनी आजीविका चला रहे हैं, उनका क्या होगा। इसी संदर्भ में हम लोगों ने कई एकेडमिक भी, हम लोग कॉलेजों में भी ये बात को हम लोग शुरुआत किया है। तो इस तरह से अगर हम जस्ट ट्रांजिशन की बात हम लोग करते हैं, और विशेष करके बदलाव की बात करते हैं, तो हम भारत के संदर्भ में अगर इसको देखेंगे तो इसकी असर जो पड़ने वाला है विशेष करके लाइवलीहुड के सवाल पर, और जो हमारे औद्योगिक जो संरचनाएं हैं इस पर भी असर पड़ेगा। तो हम मोस्टली देख रहे हैं कि इस क्षेत्र में जो पर्यावरण की स्थिति है, तो पर्यावरण की स्थिति में जस्ट ट्रांजिशन को हम करेंगे तो पर्यावरण को भी हम कैसे सुधार करते हुए यहाँ की जंगलों से हम लाइवलीहुड को कैसे हम आगे बढ़ा सकते हैं, यहाँ एग्रीकल्चर को कैसे नए रूप से हम ला सकते हैं। और अभी तक हमारे क्षेत्र में विशेष करके कोयला खदान और थर्मल पावर के कारण जो पर्यावरण की खराब स्थिति हुई है, उसको भी हम जस्ट ट्रांजिशन में हम पर्यावरणियों को कैसे हम न्यायोचित बदलाव में हम उसको शामिल कर सकते हैं। तो इस तरह से भारत के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में अगर हम देखते हैं तो आने वाले समय में जो नई ऊर्जा की बात हम कर रहे हैं, तो नई ऊर्जा के आने से हमारे पास क्या क्या उनके असर होंगे, उन असरों को हम कैसे अपने जो ग्रास रूट्स के लोग हैं, जो प्रभावित वाले लोग हैं, उनसे लेकर के उनकी योजनाओं में हम कैसे बात करेंगे, और इसके लेकर के सरकार को भी हम कैसे तैयार करेंगे कि अपने बजटीय में भी अभी से तैयारी करें कि जो हमारे जस्ट ट्रांजिशन के जो चुनौतियां आ रहे हैं उसको अवसर पे हम कैसे बदल सकेंगे। इसी संदर्भ में अभी हम लोगों ने काम स्टार्ट किया है, और हम लोगों ने चिन्हित करना शुरू किया है कि कौन कौन सा ऐसा क्षेत्र हो सकता है कि आने वाले जस्ट ट्रांजिशन को हम अवसर में बदल सकते हैं, और लोगों को जो हमारे प्रभावित होने वाले लोग हैं, जिनकी लाइवलीहुड पर असर होगा, उनको न्यायोचित बदलाव में हम कैसे शामिल करेंगे। तो इस तरह से अभी हम लोगों ने ग्रास रूट्स पर इसको काम को स्टार्ट किए हैं। धन्यवाद। थैंक यू।
Dhanyawad, Prajapati ji. So I think I can do this on his behalf for the benefit of the participants. First of all, let me thank him for for his extremely useful and valid comments about and his the work that he's doing at the ground level. Mr. Prajapati comes from the state of Jharkhand, and he represents an organization which is already in touch with the coal workers who are going to be affected by the kind of energy transition that we are talking about. He was saying that he has his organization, his group of people, they have talked to a number of several groups of coal workers, people who need rehabilitation, people whose livelihoods are dependent on the coal mining and coal production. Such people, they are already in touch with them, and they have been talking to them to identify the solutions. And this is an extremely good example of the social dialogue and social partnerships that we have been talking about, which Karthikeya presented in his theoretical framework, and which South Africa is already implementing. But this is being done not by the government, but by the NGOs. You know, this is a civil society organization which is doing this, and this inspires a lot of hope in the kind of changes that we are going to have. These are good examples of social dialogue, and hopefully through this dialogue they will be able to win the confidence of people and find the correct solutions which are not designed by people who are sitting in Delhi or sitting in exclusive chambers in the policy making circles, but people who are connected with the people on the ground. And he talked about the solutions coming from diversifying the industrial activities in areas where we can connect these people with forests, with land, with agriculture. You know, these are important dimensions. We normally forget about these issues when we talk about energy transition and industrial change. So it will be important. I think it's very important, giving based on the inputs from Mr. Prajapati, that we remain connected with the social capital, which Karthikeya also talked about in his theoretical framework, and which has come out in TERI's study, that it is not just the two issues of revenues and the jobs, but also their connection with the land, connection with the other economic activities which are dependent on coal mining, illegal mining, for example. So a number of other economic activities which will have to be created and then diversified and supported through this transition. So he says he's hopeful of constructing a social dialogue that will hopefully move the social consensus in this area. So thank you very much, Mr. Prajapati, for this. It's great that civil society organizations have taken up this challenge on behalf of the government. So with this, we have come to the end of our the panel discussion. We have some time available with us for question and answer, and I'd like to go back to Dr. Motherway, who had presented the 12 recommendations of the Global Commission on People-Centric Transition. On his second pillar, the second pillar of the recommendations, which was about social and economic development, I just wanted to know from him if the Commission has also tried to explore the possibilities of generating the resources which are required to finance this people-centric development.
Thank you, Mr. Rashmi, for the question, and thank you. I've enjoyed listening to all the different presentations here and the rich perspectives. Yes, I think for some regions, clean energy transitions are almost the first phase of creating the process of change, and then the people-centered part becomes an economic development question. In other cases, the questions are seen as more linked, where the clean energy transitions, depending on the resource availability, the current economic structures are seen as as the opportunities for socio-economic development, for new industrial development, but also for community resilience and for local generation of energy resources. Some of this depends really on region and local policies, but also the different situations, you know, and we've heard the difference, for example, between the South African case and the Indian case here. And there are some regions in India where not only is there a high dependence on coal, but there aren't many other great employers in those regions as well. And that differs to some other parts of the world where, even though there's great dependence on coal, there are other nascent industries or other resources available. So the problems differ in each situation. I think the important lesson from the Global Commission work is about alignment, is to make sure that it's not a question of different priorities competing with each other, but really seeing them as integrated. And I think if you take a people-centered view of clean energy transitions, you move away from a framework that that some people fear that people will suffer in transitions. That a transition in which people become worse off makes no sense, because the transitions are about the improvement of people's lives. And the question is how to do that in a broad sense, but also at a more local level.
Thank you very much. Can I go to Ms. Burton with the same question? She talked about the institutions, the policy-making institutions which have been tasked with with this work of framing appropriate policies and then ensuring that just transition becomes a part of the policy-making. Is there any exercise in parallel to generate the required resources to finance this kind of work?
Thanks. Yeah, so this is a really important question. I didn't get into all the details of all the policy that's under development, and this extends, to our National Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, who are developing a just energy transition framework, which also includes bigger questions. It's around mines and closing mines, but it's also around worker transition and energy access, and it kind of brings in all of those various elements, including economic diversification. For us in South Africa, financing this is a huge challenge. We have an electricity utility that has got a huge amount of debt that it can't afford to pay back. We've got a very high debt to GDP ratio. There are all sorts of constraints, fiscal and other, that limit the opportunity to kind of pour money into just transition issues. And so one part of this has been thinking, and which emerged at the COP last year, what is the link between climate finance and just transition? And that just energy transition partnership, which I think is just a first step. It's what was committed from donor countries was $8.5 billion at the COP, and that's for the first 3 to 5 years. That doesn't come close to the kind of need for both mitigation, but also for just transition. Some local estimates are that we need something like $1 billion for the worker transition part of the transition, just looking at coal mining, for example, and where that comes from and the terms of that and the mechanisms by which that gets to where it needs to be. South Africa is not yet at that level of planning. We're much more in a developing policy, developing institutions who will be pillars of parts of that process. But not yet at the, how do we get enough money to actually pay out workers who might be losing their jobs because we're accelerating the closure of assets. That discussion's not there yet. And I think it's partly also because we're closing coal plants already now, and we need to deal with a whole lot of fallout in the region. And it's very difficult to talk about bringing forward the closure of coal plants when we haven't closed any yet. We kind of need to show that we can actually close a coal plant and retrain workers or redeploy them, or have those systems and lessons in place before we say let's go faster. So it's complicated, I think, but certainly one of the key lessons for me is there's going to need to be far more financial support from developed countries to developing countries in this process.
Thank you. That's an important lesson. We certainly need to do a lot more work in this area when we start really moving away from coal. In India, we are yet to do that. In fact, in absolute terms, perhaps the coal production and coal consumption will rise for some time until it fully stabilizes, reaches its peak, and then starts coming down. But the countries which have already done that, I mean, they must have planned, like Germany has done. So similar roadmaps, I think, will need to be created in terms of economic development, financing this, and providing alternative livelihoods. Ms. Nidhi, you talked about skilling requirements and involvement of industry in this. What do you think needs to be done? Because you did point out that this is an important area. Do you think we have any blueprint for involving the industries in setting up, the skill institutes or training institutes of this kind? And where do you think the CSR alone is enough?
Thanks for asking that question. Yes, I think it's very pertinent. Do we really have those models there already, or are we still trying to explore a strategy there? But just to let the audience here know in this room that yes, there are models which have in their own spaces and silos have really proved it. Whether that's our association with the German government on looking at skilling, or some of the interventions which have been led by the corporates along with the government in of course in very small pockets. They have actually proved in terms of whether it's the quality of delivery or finally the output of the effort in terms of the employability levels and the employment aspect, or the reskilling element for that matter. But I think these are far too small and few. We really need to pick up some of these models and look at an analysis in terms of what worked for them. And each geography differs from the other. What probably worked down south may not work in the eastern part of it, because there are other social, cultural, economical aspects attached to it. So, and of course, the advent of the industrialization element also would make a difference there. What I do see is CSR as an institution per se, as a segment that it has evolved over the last 5 years, has a huge role to play in this. And when I say that, I mean, we are looking at, as you very rightly pointed out, about the social capital part of it, and the element of the capability of bringing in the development sector organization, the government per se, the academia, the media, and all these segments which are very important stakeholders in this, including the local governance, is something that we have been doing. And we know the professional or the program specific approaches to go about doing a project and its implementation. I think that as a focal point, and then to bring all of these stakeholders together, I think, but has to be brought in. But then there is an important piece which is critical, is the whole focus of the government as well in terms of bringing in changes in the larger policies when it comes to existing infrastructure, because creating infrastructure requires far more resources, and I probably have far more burden out there. But using the existing resources, as I was mentioning, the ITIs which are there, and there are many around across the country. There are more like 2 lakh plus ITIs around. Can we look at those to instill that kind of a capability? So there are models which are available. There are sector skill councils which are also there. So bringing all of these together is where the proof of the pudding will be.
Thank you. Perhaps we will, it will be important to learn about these models which are available to us so that we can replicate them and maybe multiply. So thank you very much. With this, we have come to the end of the session, and it has been a fantastic learning experience for myself. I mean, I came to know about many things, and I learned a lot by interacting with all of you. The just transition is going to be a very major challenge, just as energy transition is. But this is unavoidable if we really want to meet our climate goals or go anywhere near our net zero goals. It's important that we start grappling with the issue of just transition early and fast enough. Just as we have been talking about early and fast actions on climate stabilization, we will need to integrate the just transition measures into our policies very quickly, and we must plan for it now. We cannot, a country like India cannot wait for the next 15 years, while it continues to increase its coal consumption and sit on its haunches and then wait for the day of judgment to come. We should plan for, we should have an economic diversification plan right now, which takes into account all the requirements, so that we have enough flexibility when we put actions on the ground. And for this energy transition, we can depend on technology, but just transition, we cannot depend simply on the technology. We have to take all the stakeholders into confidence. We have to have their consensus so as to avoid social conflicts and anarchy here. So this is a great challenge, and the lesson is that we should start building towards that. It's great that the Global Commission has already started work on this with the active cooperation of the International Energy Agency. I must compliment Dr. Motherway for telling us about the 12 recommendations, and hopefully they will be able to translate this roadmap into actionable points in specific cases. Karthikeya did point out the constraints and the challenges in the Indian scenario, and here it's not just the jobs and the livelihoods, but as he pointed out, the issues relating to the land and the illegal, the other economic activities where there is an indirect employment. That's extremely large sector. We will have to take that also into account. Ms. Kieffer did mention about the importance of whole economy approach, and I wholeheartedly endorse this, that without having a whole of economy or mainstreaming these issues into our policies, we are simply not going to get the energy transition at the scale and at the pace at which we want. I thank Ms. Nidhi for drawing our attention to the need of building capacity through the private sector, through the corporate sector, for skilling for alternative jobs, and that's a critical piece of work that in the whole matrix of job transition. We need to address this significantly and appropriately. I cannot thank Ms. Burton more for enlightening me about the kind of work that is being done in South Africa at the institutional level in terms of just transition. This is a great work, and I compliment her government as well for including this in the policy formulation. Of course, the resource generation remains a challenge, like for any other action that we take to meet our climate obligations. This will remain there, but the very fact that they have integrated this in their policy making and created institutions, this is a great sign, and it will be a learning. I'm sure other countries will learn from this practice. Thank you, Professor Swarnakar, for telling us about the kind of the academic interest which has been generated by the just transition issues across the world, and this is enlightening. Of the only regret that I have is most of the work has been done in the developed countries. The developing countries should come forward to have more of academic papers on the subject, and maybe thinking people like you can come forward and create a group of this nature. And then last but not the least, I must thank Mr. Prajapati for his excellent feedback from the ground. As we say in the media, people in the media will say, Zameen se, matlab, they are reporting from the ground. So he was reporting to us from the ground. This is an excellent news that people like him, the civil society practitioners, have already started work in this area of building consensus for this kind of transition. So thank you. So this has been a great enriching discussion, and I must thank all the panelists, all the participants once again on my behalf and on behalf of TERI for your participation. Thank you very much, and over to you, Karthikeya, once again.
Thank you, Mr. Rashmi, and I would just like to end the panel. A warm regards from us, and thank you for joining us from across the world from different time zones. I understand it's getting very late in some areas. Thank you very much for taking out the valuable time. I would like to thank the International Energy Agency for partnering with us. Without them, we would not be able to do this. And we've gained some valuable insights and some exquisite understanding of how we can move forward with just transition. And we would like to implement this in our work going forward. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy.